Today, we're lucky enough to have two guests joining us on Thriller Talk. First up, born in Michigan before moving to the Sunshine State, where he now lives with his wife, their two daughters, and their golden retriever. Landon Beach previously served as a naval officer and was an educator for 15 years before he just recently became a full-time writer. His books have received high praise from the likes of Ted Bell, Steve Barry, and Dirk Kussler. An actor, writer, and award-winning audiobook narrator of more than 800 books, nobody knows how to tell a story quite like Scott Brick. With over 600 earphone awards and 5 audio awards, plus a Grammy nomination for the multicast recording of The Mark of Zorro, Scott has cemented his legacy as one of the most iconic narrators the industry has ever known. And today, we're going to be talking to both of them. Gentlemen, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Hey, Ryan. Hey, Kim. Thanks for having us on.
Oh, it's so fun to have you both. I'm just picturing Scott's mantle. Do you have all those awards somewhere special in your office?
I have one of them. I got the Voice Arts Legacy Award a couple of months ago, so I keep this. This account, it's my one ego wall in the house.
Deserve it.
Pretty good one. So great to have you both here. Thank you for joining us. To kick things off, I want to touch on how you both got into the industry. So starting with you, Landon, when did you know you wanted to become a writer, and what made you finally take the plunge and write your first book?
Well, I've known I wanted to be a writer pretty much since I started school. And finally, around 2018, I went forward with my first book, The Wreck. And now, in about a little over a month, I'm going to have my 6th novel come out titled Narrator, which is also my 6th collaboration with Scott Brick.
That's incredible. And congratulations on all your success, Landon. I've really enjoyed watching your career. As we know, we've been in touch many times over email. And Scott, you know, you, as Ryan said, you really have become the iconic narrator in the thriller genre, especially. That we specialize in. How did you end up getting into this, and what was your background?
I went to UCLA, the theater department there. I would do, I did 10 years as a traveling Shakespearean actor, which was really kind of cool. Talking to my high school English teacher, Mrs. Hickman, after I started working, I'm like, hey, get a load of me. Kid from Porterville, California, making a living doing Shakespeare. Blah, blah, blah. That was nice, but it was in 1999. I, through a friend at UCLA, I got an audition for Dove Audio. And, it's interesting. I always say that the entertainment industry, the publishing industry, lays out a welcome mat in a different place for everybody. Where you think you might be going in, maybe you don't quite, but wherever it lays out the mat, walk in, and once you're there, go where you want to go. And people just started casting me for thrillers, and I always read them. I just never thought that I could make that kind of my focus, but it happened, and I'm grateful.
It's fascinating to have you both here because, well, as we already mentioned, Scott, you narrate Landon's books. So to both of you, what's the process like? At what point in the writing process, Landon, do you involve Scott? And then Scott, what are the first steps that you take when you come on board to actually narrate the book?
So for the first 3 books, they were already written, and I had the privilege of talking with Scott's wonderful business manager, Gina Smith, who's just been wonderful, so sweet, so supportive. And those were sort of a package deal. And so Scott worked on those 3. And we talked very little. We didn't know each other really that well at that point. And then when we got to book 4 and book 5, we started to get to know each other a little bit more. And there were some more discussions about what might be possible with the book, and those were a little bit more collaborative. And then finally, when we got to Narrator, because of the subject matter, we did a lot of collaborating and discussing, and Scott was really generous with his time and expertise to kind of go over some of the ins and outs of audiobook narration, the art and science of it. and then I would go back and work on it to try to make it come alive. And that's been pretty much ongoing since the project started. So it's been a little bit different each time, but each time has been memorable and a lot of fun.
Yeah. You know, I want to say the first time that we really got to know one another was one of the very first times Zoom calls that we had. Of course, this was during COVID, but we had a contest for one of the books, and it was, you know, have dinner with Landon and Scott, even though obviously we couldn't actually all be in the same room. But we sent them the winner like a Uber Eats gift card, something like that, and we all basically had dinner just chatting on the computer. And Landon and I realized we had so much in common. All these film references are just shooting, you know, flying back and forth. Yeah, it's been really great. To answer your question, Ryan, that my process basically is Landon writes a lot of standalone titles, which I love, but you know, when you're working on a series, I work on a lot of ongoing series with, you know, the main character stays the same, and there's not always a whole lot of change to the main character in an ongoing series. Sometimes, yes, ideally, yes, but with standalones, what I have to do is I have to figure out, well, who's the protagonist? And you all, you know, writers, you know that, you know, the protagonist is the character who changes, not necessarily the title character, or, you know, if it was in a film or TV show, the person with top billing. I mean, look at Big Bang Theory. Leonard is top billing on the show, but it's Sheldon. Changed over the course of time. In Star Trek, it was Mr. Spock who changed, second build character. So I always have to identify who changes and how. And once I see at the beginning where they are and at the end where they are, I just kind of do this little bell curve. And whatever it is that changes them, every time that comes up in the story, I just raise the stakes a little bit more. So by the time we get up here to the change, it doesn't come as a surprise.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's actually very powerful because not only is the character development in the writing, it's in the storytelling as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I try to reflect it. Yeah, I try to reflect what Landon puts down. You know, it's my job.
well, I think it's wonderful when authors and audiobook narrators do collaborate more and more. I had a wonderful experience with Therese Plummer, and
Oh yeah,
she's a wonderful lady.
absolutely.
And we got on the phone because my thrillers are very international, and there was a lot of things about pronunciation she wasn't sure about. And she was so professional to call me up and ask this. And is that something that you guys talk about too? The pronunciation of different things?
So Scott has an incredible researcher and research team that hammer out most of that. We might talk about one or two instances about certain characters, but here's one example. So as I came up with this audiobook narrator, Sean Frost, I thought, what might be a fun scenario for him with this best-selling thriller series that he has always narrated? What would be a ritual that he would have in his booth after each one? And so I thought back to, you know, my love of Marvel characters and growing up with Bill Bixby and the Incredible Hulk show and the Lonely Man theme. And so, Kim, I'll never, it's not my area expertise, nor is it my place, you know, to ever, you know, tell Scott about how to narrate a book. But what I found fun, and he's been very welcoming in this regard, is I sent him an audio recording of The Lonely Man, and I said, do with it, you know, what you will, and see how that might affect your performance. And so he took it and played it, and then he wrote me back at one point and said that it helped him, you know, getting into character for that opening scene, feeling like you're in the booth finishing this, you know, thriller series that this, you know, Sean Frost had worked on forever. So that's been the fun part of the collaboration. So it's allowed some creativity and whatnot. And there's so many pop culture references in narrator that I gave him an email that had a ton of those. And again, it was just whatever you might want to use, Scott, to help out, go for it.
I loved the Hulk show when I was a kid, and I love that opening theme. I actually never knew it was called The Lonely Man until Landon sent it to me, and I went onto YouTube and I played it before working, and I thought, I have to do this a lot more. And I narrate the Jack Reacher books, and I've got one coming up that I'm going to be recording, I want to say in August, and I've got rituals for that too. I bring my travel toothbrush, and I'm gonna listen to that with my travel toothbrush in my pocket before I get started. And I'm grateful. I love it when stuff like that happens.
And drink lots of coffee, right?
Exactly.
That's fantastic. So Landon, I live in Toronto, and I'm on Lake Ontario. And I wondered, like, how you launched your writing career with the Great Lakes Saga, and what it was about the Great Lakes. And I know Ryan here is Mr. Michigan, so we're covering a couple here today. What are the what is the beauty or the ambiance that you wanted to capture in them?
So when it came with writing the Great Lakes Saga, it's home for me. I'm born and raised in Michigan, and there is some great fiction that has come out of Michigan and some great books, but there isn't a lot. Like when you read about Caribbean mysteries or whatnot, I mean, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of books. And so I've always thought that the history and the uniqueness of the area and the beauty and treachery too, it's very dangerous at different seasons, and you're getting full throttle every single one of the 4 seasons that come through. I thought it would be the perfect place to set stories. And so a little bit of a gadget or gimmick or whatnot, I set one on or around each Great Lake, and they're all standalones. And so you can read them in any order, but if you read them chronologically from the date that they were published, I always reward my loyal fans with a couple callbacks and some Easter eggs in there. But you can read them in any order and enjoy them. And they're all different genres too. So with The Wreck, it was about the Holy Grail of Great Lakes shipwrecks, and I wove in a treasure thread. And so there's a lot of fun summer adventure there. The Sail was a dying father with his son trying to take one last trip together around Lake Superior, which I believe is the 4th largest freshwater lake in the world. And things go, to quote Scott, horribly, horribly wrong. And it turns into a nightmare. The Cabin on Lake Ontario, that was a political thriller, an espionage thriller. And then The Hike was about 2 brothers and an organized crime thriller. And so I've still got one more to go, The Bay, and that'll be on the final Great Lake, and that'll be on Lake Michigan. But what my aim is, Kim, is to be a little bit different in terms of they're all my protagonists, they're all ordinary people like all of us, 99% of us. And I try to put them in extraordinary circumstances. And as Scott and Ryan will tell you, there's no guarantee that they're always going to make it to the end. And so what it does is that allows me to have all of my storytelling tools on the table for each novel. Nothing's off the table for the menu of options I can use. And I find that brings out my best writing. And so that was my aim with the Great Lakes Saga, was to present it that way. And so even if you don't like certain genres, you might like another book in there.
It's really impressive to me that you can do that, just jump from genre to genre. Very well done. And I also think, it made me laugh when you talk about Caribbean, because of course everyone wants to be down there on vacation researching for their novel. But there's something about, like, because I live on Lake Ontario, and I'm very familiar with the Great Lakes. There's something about that dark navy blue water that has that sinister feel. So I think you chose very well.
Oh, thanks, Kim.
So another ironic thing here today, given that Landon, you're on with your narrator, is that the next book, your next book is actually called Narrator, which great cover, by the way. That's sitting over your shoulder. What can you tell us about that book and where the story idea for it actually come from?
All right. So, because I really like to write standalones, and also too, I'll make clear, I'm not against series too. I read a lot of series and enjoy them. I just happen to really like standalone novels, and I am writing a detective series right now that'll be a trilogy of 3 books. So I'm all in on both types, and I really respect those that can carry a character for 18 or 19 books. There's a whole new set of skills and challenges with that as well. But for narrator, really, it's been an idea that's been in my mind for forever, really. I grew up watching tons of films, and I still do, and I love to talk to Scott about them. But really, it was probably 4 films that influenced us the most. And it was Vertigo, Play Misty for me, Misery, and A Beautiful Mind. And I wanted to tell an entertainment comeback story because I love old Hollywood. I love stories like that. But there's been so much that's been done that I had no idea what to tell, because to tell that is really difficult, and to make it thrilling and exciting. It's kind of like, telling an author story. Like, he was in his room alone writing. There was a pencil. He saw a book. Like, you're going to check out after about 2 minutes. And so I had to find the right opportunity, and I thought of it for years, 20 years. And then all of a sudden I started working with Scott, and I said, you know what? I don't think anyone has ever written anything about an audiobook narrator, very much a part of the entertainment business. And as Scott has said, part of the book business, not the film side. And so I thought, well, what would happen with that? And so I thought about it and thought about it. And then I came up with a character and did months and months of research before I even approached Scott, because I wanted to make sure that I had all my research intact, so that he'd know that I was serious about this, and be able to take a look. And believe me, as the more I thought of it, it was a book where I'm like, this will be really easy for him to say no. Like, this is awful. Don't do this. And I didn't want that to happen. And so one time, it was right around when Huron Breeze, he was starting to work on that, which is one of my detective novels. And we got to a lull in the conversation. And like we talked about before, Ryan, because he's such an amazing narrator, I get caught up in the Zoom calls where I'm just like listening to his stories. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, we're supposed to be working here. And so I said, Scott, can I run something by you? And he's like, oh, sure. And I said, well, I'm thinking about doing this book about an audiobook narrator who possibly gets kidnapped by 2, obsessed fans that are like, you're gonna, narrate our book. And I'll never forget, his eyes, he was looking down at the screen. He's just like, and he looked at me, and I was like, all right. And then asked him some questions. And then, as Scott has said before, it kind of went away, and he went to work and I went to work. And then, months later, after, hours upon hours of, 13-hour writing days and whatnot, I finally had a serviceable draft that I was ready to show him. And so what I would say it ended up being is, it's an entertainment comeback story, a psychological thriller with Sean Frost, who was a performing arts prodigy in New York City, 2-time Tony Award winner. But his flaws start to emerge as he gets success. And he has to travel all the way over, after a near-death experience, to Carmel by the Sea out in California, and reinvents himself as an audiobook narrator. And again, his skills start to raise, and he gets notoriety, and he's wonderful. But also his flaws concurrently start to come up. And then that's when the possible kidnapping takes place. And then I'll leave it at that.
When things go horribly wrong.
Right.
Horribly wrong. Having read
Soundbite, narrator.
Having read it, because I get to cover it on the Book Spy, I can say that it's got like Harlan Coben like twists with some Gone Girl stuff thrown in there. It's fantastic. So well done.
Thanks, Ryan.
Now, of course, Scott is looking over his shoulder every time he leaves the house.
Oh, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. When that look that he described, when I was like,
What?
There it is.
what that look was, wait, you were serious? You know, because we have this conversation and he's asking me questions, and months go by, and I've gone off to do various other projects, and suddenly a manuscript, shows up in my email, and I'm like, oh, this is real. Okay, I have to tell you, two things. I begged him to put an exclamation mark at the end of narrator. The way Clive Cussler used to do, raise the Titanic or night probe. And I love, and as a matter of fact, in one of the most recent Jason Bourne book I did, they talk about the effect of an exclamation mark. But to me, it just means jazz hands. It's like I'm working on narrator, and so that's why now whenever Landon and I talk, I'm just like, I'm narrating. The other thing is that we had some friends over to watch the Indy 500 not long ago, and my friend Josh came over and he saw my hard copy version of narrator. It was sitting on the chair in the living room that I was using for prep, and he reads the beginning of it, and he begged me. He goes, "Can I take this with me? I need to finish this." I said, "Sure." And he said, "Also, you're going to die this way, right?" I went, "What?" He goes, No, this is going to happen. Do you really want this to be out there like a blueprint for somebody to kidnap you? So yes, Kim, to answer your question, I do look over my shoulder at great deal.
Well, just so you know, Scott, my expertise is actually kidnapping. I've been studying it for 7 years. So if the worst comes to pass, make sure your girlfriend calls me. I have the top negotiators on speed dial. Okay.
Okay.
We'll work it.
I've already done the research to find out how to get out of zip tie handcuffs with your shoelaces. I know how to do that, but that's a baby step. I'm ready to take the rest.
I'm excited. All right. So Scott, out of all the books that you've narrated over the years, and I know there's so many different genres and types, are there any titles that stood out to you as particularly challenging?
Oh yeah, sure. It's interesting. I think in many ways, I mean, there's a time I remember doing a science fiction title where the author, Something More Than Night by Ian Tregillis, and the author had split the main character. Again, it's science fiction. The main character split into two, and they had concurrent actions, and he wrote it in 2 columns on the same page.
Wow.
And that's obviously a challenge. I mean, how the hell do you do that? It took me about an hour to figure out, and I came up with my approach and I did it. But I think in many ways the biggest challenge is to remember that you may be working on a series where you feel like, yeah, I know this character, and I know what's going to happen. I've done 100, 200, 300 thrillers, whatever it is. The challenge becomes remembering that every single time you work on one, you find something new. And I remember working on a book, and I wish I could remember the title of it. It's been 10, 15 years, but it was an early book by Steve Barry. And this penultimate chapter is where the bad guy dies. He gets gut shot and spends the rest, the final page of that chapter feeling his heartbeat slow as he's slowly bleeding out. And I looked at it, and it was so long ago that there were actual pages. And there was something about it. I did the page, I finished the chapter, and then I spoke with my director, Christina Rooney, just best in the business. And I said, hang on, there's something here, and I don't think I'm getting it. And I looked at the page, and I looked at the margins, and I noticed that all of the paragraphs kept getting shorter and shorter. 3 lines, 3 sentences, 2 sentences, 1 sentence. And then the sentences got shorter and shorter. And I noticed that the text was doing this on the page. Started up here, full margins, and then it started coming down to here. And that's a visual cue for the reader of, you know, the print edition, the dead tree version, right? But I needed to be able to sell that to the listener. And I realized by the end of the page, all of the sentences were in 2-syllable chunks, 2 words or 1 2-syllable word. And finally got to the very end, and I asked to redo the whole page. And I started slowing down and slowing down and slowing down, and then intentionally adding the lub-dub, 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 you know, cadence to those very short sentences, until by the end, it became, I'm trying to remember, that's it, no more goodbye. And that was the challenge, to realize that there was something there that I hadn't seen. You know, you never want to get into autopilot, right? You know, you as authors, you don't want to do that. And as narrators, we don't want to do that. And I don't want the listener to, you know, to go into autopilot either.
What a powerful way of interpreting that visual cue, you know, and language cue, right? Because it's like we talked about earlier, it's like the written word versus the performance word, you know, and you really, it sounds like you really nailed that.
I hope so. You know, authors use visual cues all the time, but the listener won't get it unless I can figure out a way to give them an audio equivalent. So.
And so, you know, you speak obviously all day long. What are the things that you do to protect your voice? And do people drive you crazy asking you to do karaoke?
The first thing I thought of to protect my voice, I don't do karaoke, which is no great loss, believe me.
You sound pretty good.
Well, thank you. I'm not really much of a singer, although there is I've forgotten the name, Disturbed, the band. It's like this acid rock band. They do a cover of The Sound of Silence. And my girlfriend and I, we will watch it. Suzanne and I will watch it in the living room. We'll pull up YouTube on the TV. And I can do like the first, you know, the first 3, she handles the last 2, you know, because I just can't go that high. But on the deep ones, you know, on the baritone ones, yeah, I can definitely rock that. Look, I remember the first time we did that, it was very difficult to work the next day.
Yeah.
So the primary thing I do is hydrate. You've been seeing me with, you know, tea and my sugar-free Gatorade, because the larynx is a muscle, and muscles fail without water. Any chiropractor will tell you that. Any science book will tell you that. So I hydrate like crazy. There was a time when I was really sick, and part of the treatment I had to have, I was having 12 liters of water a day. And as my father told me at the time, wow, you added a whole lot of vitamin P to your diet. But I noticed that when I did that, all my sore throats went away. So I've become the unofficial hydration guru of the audiobook industry. And a matter of fact, my buddy Johnny Heller, he told me one time a student came to him and said, Johnny, is there anything I can do for vocal health other than drink all that freaking water that Scott Brick wants me to drink? So that's the primary thing. Don't sing karaoke. If I go to a Dodger game, I can't yell really loud when they hit a home run. And then just hydrate.
So Landon, I'm thinking that that's your next title, Hydrator.
Scott's Revenge. It's an author that drowns.
I wish I would have known that 18 months ago, Scott. I did a promotional tour for radio. It was like 50 radio shows in 20 days
Oh, God,
to talk thrillers. And I remember the first day 1, I got up and I have bad allergies, like I've been battling today, and I sounded like I smoked 5 packs of cigarettes before that first interview. And I get in, and I was one of those, it was very embarrassing because I was like, hey, thanks for having me on. Anyway, and it just never got better. And
Yeah.
I was on for a 12-minute segment, and after like 30 seconds, they were like, Ryan, it's pretty obvious you're really sick, buddy. Go feel better. We hope it's not COVID. And they ended the segment, and they kicked me back to the producer on the radio show. They're like, Ryan, we're really sorry you're sick. And I was like, I'm totally fine. I just have allergies, you know. So I didn't even know I needed to drink 8 gallons of water a day.
Just a couple of months ago, when the movie Dune came out, you know, I've narrated every book in that franchise. I think 25 volumes now, and they arranged a radio tour, you know, of interviews for me. And the problem was, it's all East Coast morning drive, you know, drive time radio. I had to wake up at 3:30 in the morning, my time, and you can't hydrate in 10 minutes. So I was going through the same thing, and I'm like, wow, why am I so scratchy? What, didn't I follow my own advice? Of course I have been. It just takes time. That's all, you know. It's like doing things that early in the morning, that is not your friend.
Coming back to the narrating process, we've heard how you guys work, you know, sort of leading up to it, especially that process. But how much say, if at all, Landon, does the author have in the narrator's performance?
Well,
I apologize that an emergency broadcast thing came over. I'm so sorry.
I'll start, Ryan, with when I was researching the book, there were just some absolute horror stories that I had read, just about authors and intrusion into narrators and trying to tell them their jobs, and really, I mean, horrible stuff. You know, never been that way, you know, between Scott and myself, but I have a trust level for him and what he's able to do. And it's more like, if I have a question, like for instance, one time, here's probably the best example. I'm really big into Christmas, as well as Scott is another point that we have. And I had one of my favorite Christmas songs, just a few lines from it, in one of my books. And I said, you know, Scott is singing a few bars of a song, because, you know, some lyrics. Is that something that you do? And of course he said, you know, we can't do that because of copyright. And so that was kind of like a discussion that we've had. Now, if, again, where we're at now in book 6, I don't know if you want to call it a shorthand, but there might be something that I say, this is sort of where we get going in this part of the book. And it's just more of a cue. It's not really like, hey, Scott, could you narrate chapter 27 like this? It's not that level, that micro level.
Yeah, it's to me, it's a fascinating process because, well, it's just wonderful to be trusted. Let me just say that. I've had varying degrees of interaction with the authors I work with. Brad Meltzer really was the first guy who started calling me regularly, or I would call him when I would work on one of his books. And he said, just FYI, this is a visual cue that I did in the book. I want to make sure it gets across okay. And I'm like, I love it. You get it. You understand that there are certain translations that have to happen. Of course, you know, that guy starts throwing in all sorts of crazy accents to trip me up, but that's, you know, a story for another time. I remember other times where I was being hired. The first time I was hired directly by an author, he flew out to direct me to sit in the studio. He wasn't really directing. He just kind of wanted to be along on the journey. And he had written this story where the main character in this short story was a woman, and she was a fashion model, and she's being photographed by a world famous photographer. And the line was, work it. That's right. Work the camera, make love to the camera, you know, yes, baby. Yes. Something like that. And all I could think about was, it sounds like, you know, Austin Powers. So I was like, that's right. Work it, work the camera. That's right. You're making love to the camera. Yeah, baby. Yeah. And
Uh,
he stopped me. He got on the talkback, you know, the hits the talkback button so that we can hear each other from room to room. And he goes, I'm sorry, I'm just I don't remember writing a whole lot about this photographer. I'm like, yeah, what's the problem? And he goes, I don't remember saying that he's British. And I said, you didn't, but you kind of heavily implied just by the language. You know, you wrote it essentially in dialect. And he goes, right. And I said, you know, you hired me because you trust me. So that really seemed to be a really organic way to approach this character. And he goes, right. I just don't see anything about him being British. I said, okay. And I read it really straightforward and boring. I'm like, all right, you know. So when Landon was talking about there have been nightmare, not many, but there have been times where you're just not trusted by the author. And frankly, that it is a great honor and privilege in my career that when I'm given a book, I realize that the author is trusting me to interpret it. So that's why the two of us working together has been just a dream job.
Yeah, that's lovely. It's sort of like, you know, when you think about as an author, every reader brings their baggage and backstory to the page. And it's interesting, like you said, that your interpretations as well are coming to the forefront. And another narrator might have done it differently too. So I love that because it becomes very personalized and really, I think, a better quality. Because it's, you know.
Yeah, one thing I would add too is, so when Scott is done with his run through of it, he'll send me the files and I'll just do a proof where I read through them. And that is always one of the most exciting parts of the entire process, is to get those files. And I remember for one particular book, I was in my office like I am now and listening to it, and I've got my surround sound, I've got my little notes, and I'm listening to him perform. And it got to a point where, you know, things are getting pretty crazy and the villain's going after the protagonist. And Scott got so into the characters, like the villain is like, and I am not gonna, and like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, I don't ever want Scott Brick to be mad at me in my life. And my 5-year-old daughter at the time was outside of my office and she came bolting in, and I knew there were swear words and things coming up. I'm like, oh, I turned it off. I'm like, what's up, sweetie? She's like, Daddy, you know, is everything okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, just, you know, Daddy's buddy Scott, he's the bad guy is coming after the good guy. And she's like, well, you know, immediately, is everybody going to be okay? And I lied and I said, sure, everybody's going to be good. The good guy's getting away. And she closed the door and I think they died 2 pages later. But yeah, it's, you know, and there's things just like a proofer, you know, you listen to things and go back and forth about what the possibilities might be as we're trying to get that finished product as good as possible. And I've listened to the first 25 chapters of Narrator, and I'm just so excited for the beginning of August for everybody to be able to listen to that. I think we're going to give everybody a really fun escape and a good ride.
Yeah. You know, I talking to so many writers at once, I'm reminded that, you know, in the old days, or look, frankly, just as you're putting the book down in print, right? You're working at the computer, or 100 years ago, you're sitting at the typewriter. The formula was the author's words and the reader's eyes, right? The reader's brain with the eyes interpreting it, and they were doing all of the interpretation. But then audiobooks came around right around World War I, frankly, and suddenly an extra step came in. You know, you have the writer's words and the listener's brain, but in between is me, or my colleagues. And I was working with the director one time, Yuri Rozovsky, bless his soul. He passed away a number of years ago, but he told me, I think we were discussing, does listening to a book count as reading it? And he said, yes, in the sense that, the listener still gets the story, but they get it through a construct, and the construct is you. Your job, my job, is to be as small a construct as possible. I mean, yes, of course, on the page where I scared his daughter, there are times where you have to be, a little bit larger, but still, I want the construct to be as small as possible. So people aren't paying as much attention to me as they are to the author's words. Look, I'm as shallow as the next actor, but if I get a review that doesn't mention, if there's an audiobook review that doesn't mention my performance, great, means I've done my job.
That's very interesting. Wow, I like that a lot. Going back to you, Landon, we talked about the incredible diversity of your backlist, and I know that narrator is told in first person present tense. Can we ask about that choice?
Sure. So I had never written a book in first person before, but my background is in screenwriting, which is in present tense. So I had a little bit of a way in to start the book, but I thought for this particular book, because the booth and the job of an audiobook narrator is so personal. It's like we talk about, reading is so personal between the author and the reader. It's this relationship, and I would include the audiobook narrator in there as well. It's so personal. But in order for this to have the tension and immediacy, I thought, with it being in first person and in present tense, like, this is happening right now. And I've said this before in other interviews, I never thought of Scott Brick as Sean Frost, but I always thought, because of his incredible accolades as an actor, I said, this is a dream come true. I said, Scott Brick could play Sean Frost. And to bring him to life, and all throughout the book, I wanted to feel like Sean is telling us something, and this is happening right now, and I need to know what's going on with this guy and what's going to happen next. And so, looking back, I was really happy with the choice. It was difficult. I had to get used to it. But then later on, I saw the rewards of doing that, because for what I love about third person omniscient, especially third person close, Scott even teaches a seminar about what you can do as a narrator with third person close, which is incredible. To get it maybe a little bit closer to first person, and how you can be more active. I just don't think I could have ever reached what I wanted to without going first person and first person present. And so that was the main decision about this, was because it's a psychological thriller, and for 123,000 words, you're in Sean Frost's head. And I felt that's what it had to be.
I cannot wait. That's exciting.
And you pulled it off really well. It's got a very Don Winslow like vibe to it for people that haven't read a lot of first person present tense. Don Winslow does it really well, and I felt like it was very much similar to that in a certain way. Landon, so like, yes, I'm in Michigan. Kim lives near one of the Great Lakes. I want to come back to this. This is just a quick hitter for you.
Okay.
You sort of mentioned that you're not necessarily done with the Great Lakes saga. Obviously, I'd like to see one on Lake Michigan. Is that something you plan to come back to? And do you have any idea when you might do that?
Yeah, and so the murder mystery that I wrote in December that came out, and the audiobook just came out for Huron Breeze, I'm going to have that be a trilogy. And so it's going to be Huron Nights and then Huron Sunrise. And I'm writing those back to back right now. But as soon as I'm done with those, I'm going to finish the Great Lakes saga, and it'll be titled The Bay. And it does take place on or around Lake Michigan. And then that'll complete that particular saga. So yes, it's on the way. Right now, I'm deep into Riley Cannon and Obadiah Ben David again, with another mystery.
Love it.
exciting news. So this is to both of you. You can't be an author or a narrator. What would you like to do?
Scott can go first.
I would probably be a silent film historian that, got my all my silent film library here in my office. But to be honest, I have twice been offered a job to be a professional pastry cook. But I didn't want to spend my life in the kitchen. It's really hot in there. So I still do it for fun, but yeah, I actually was at I was at a PF Chang's, and a friend was it was her birthday, and my best friend and I we thought we would go in and celebrate her birthday even though she was working. So I baked a cake and I said, here you go, take it back, share it among the kitchen staff. And she did, and next thing I know, we're getting up to leave, and the manager sits me down. He goes, before you go, could I get your card? I'm really not happy with our pastry chef, and I was wondering if maybe we could make a change and have you take over. And I was like, I'm not a baker. I mean, I'm an amateur, but anyway, that's probably what I would do.
Well, it's funny, writing full time now. One of the things that I've heard for years that an author has to do is take an acting class, and how it can inform your writing and whatnot. And I have just always been just enamored with the film industry and acting. And so my first was a disaster. I think I was 6 or 7 years old in a Christmas play at my church, and I was supposed to deliver 4 or 5 lines. And I think I got one word out, froze up, and basically stared at the manger for the rest of the time. It may have been the only time I ever heard my pastor swear. And so it didn't go well, but I'd like to give it, maybe that a shot, or at least take a class. I think that'll be something. But also too, I could never, I don't think I could ever turn my back on, teaching if that ever came around again. It was such a rewarding and thrilling career. And I loved all my students and wished them well. So it was a heck of a ride. It was a heck of a, but maybe some acting.
Scott, with such a brilliant career, what are you most proud of thus far?
Wow, great question. I mean, there's a lot of series that I work on that I'm really proud of having done. To be honest, I think it's maybe the thing I felt most honored by was when my alma mater, UCLA, asked me to come back and teach. I had long been teaching, day-long, weekend-long seminars about audiobook narration to new narrators or veteran narrators, and I've been coaching one-on-one as well. But something about when you get asked by your old school to come back, and the craziest thing is that I never even graduated. I never got a degree. I got sick at the end of my college career, and I'd run out of student aid, and I had to go work, and it just blows my mind that a guy who never even got his undergrad degree is teaching a class that the third-year graduate acting students cannot get their degree unless they come through me. And it tickles me pink. I don't think I've ever felt more more honored, but also I don't think I've ever felt more simultaneously young and old, because I show up to campus and I'm like, yeah, it's like I never left. And then I realize how young everybody is, and I go, oh dear God, I was never that young. But it's been a real honor.
What would be one tip you'd give to someone who's going to narrate a book? I just love to hear your thought.
Drink a lot of water.
Other than drink a lot of water, right? You know what I often lead with in my classes at UCLA, and it's something that you guys were touching on earlier about that, first person present. I always say, if it is a first person narrative, ask yourself, when is the story being told and why is it being told and to whom? Because you can have the same, let's say it's a murder mystery, right? It could be in the immediate aftermath, and you're talking to a police officer, therefore this is either a witness statement or a confession if it's a non-reliable narrator, right? Or let's say it's 20 years later and you're dealing with the trauma and you're talking to a shrink and you just need to get past this. Or if it's 60 years later and you're losing your memory, and you need the great book by Walter Mosley, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. This is a guy who is losing he's dealing with dementia, but he witnessed something and he needs to get it out there and he needs to get justice before he can't remember it anymore. All of those are three different dynamic choices that you make. One, it's happening right now. Oh my God, I can't believe what I just saw. Or two, it happened 20 years ago, I need to get past it. Or three, I can barely remember it. Those are three different choices. So I always say, as authors do, who, what, where, when, and why. Ask yourself those questions and make a dynamic choice.
Amazing. So just before we wrap up, we'd love to hear from both of you on what you're working on next.
Well, so Narrators going to come out on August 2nd. And so gearing up for the launch and the release and all the things that you've got to do to get that ready. I'm in the middle of writing Huron Nights, which is the second in the trilogy. And then when I'm finished with that, I think that I may even do a novella that is a precursor to when the final book comes out. And I may be doing some work with Scott's girlfriend, Suzanne, who's mentioned in the book. So that's a project I'm really excited for. And of course, too, to hear Scott finish out Rachel's journey in the book is going to be really something special too. So busy fall.
I've got the last few chapters of to finish. Then I have the Clive Cussler book called Hellburner, which I believe is it's in the Oregon Files series. I have a Nelson DeMille book coming up, which I have to be honest, I don't even know the title of that one yet. And then I'm working on a Halo science fiction novel, the Rubicon Protocol. I do a lot of books in that series. So
I could totally hear you do John Corey. Can't you, Ryan?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Totally good.
it's so funny.
It's called The Maze, Scott.
The Maze. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I did hear that. Because I got his newsletter a while back, and he announced what it would be, and that it's a John Corey novel. And I couldn't be happier. I had somebody at a conference one time. They said, "Could you just talk in your John Corey voice for me?" And I said I couldn't, which was true. I wasn't putting him off. I said, "I'm sorry, it just happens when I got the words in front of me, I can do it."
Mm-hmm.
But almost any other character that I play in any series that I'm working on, I can do it. But John Corey is it's so precise, and it's just all in the text.
And it's been a while too, hasn't it, Scott, since he had one?
Yeah, he did a I thought it was a standalone, but apparently it's the start of a trilogy. He did a book with his son, Alex, The Cuban Affair, I believe.
Yep.
And that was a wonderful book. I just loved it. Actually, no, I take that back. That was a standalone. Then he did another one with his son. I'm blanking on the name, but the Defector, something like that. The
Deserter. The
Deserter.
Right?
Thank you. That's the beginning of a trilogy. And so he did those two books, since he had done, the previous John Corey novel. And, all of his fans just keep asking for more. And so do I. Frankly, the Lions was
Me
my
too.
first bestseller. So, I'm just so happy to get back to that character anytime I can.
Well, I can't thank you enough. You guys have been phenomenal today, Ryan. It's been like wildly entertaining and educational at the same time. So thank you. We'd love to have you back anytime at all, and wish you the best of luck in your pursuits.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Ryan, for having us on. Appreciate everything that you do for the thriller industry and books.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Kim. It's a privilege getting to work in this industry, but anytime I get to talk about audiobooks, it's just, it's an honor.
Our pleasure to have you on. Thank you, gentlemen, both for coming on, and we had a blast.